Я слышу, что позвонил.
Я позову.
Может быть. Есть, да.
Добрий день, я вітаю всіх, хто приєднався.
Hello everyone who has joined us. This is Ukraine Media Center at Ukrinform, and right now I would like to introduce Damien Magrou, our next speaker, speaker of the International Legion. Hello. And Damien, we all know about the role that the International Legion is playing in this liberation war right now. So I would like to start the discussion with the losses that unfortunately are happening. We have recently heard about the Brazilian members dying here.
Thank you for being here. My third such press conference on behalf of the International Legion. We made public last week that we have had 3 more killed in action in the International Legion. Once again, I repeat, as I said before, on previous occasions we've made public 4 names. And I said back then that these are not exhaustive. The names that we make public are never all of the casualties that we have, unfortunately, for a variety of different reasons. Sometimes we're not able to make those public. But we made public 3 more names last week, 2 Brazilians, 1 man, 1 woman, and 1 more French casualty. We've had a lot of questions from foreign media regarding those casualties. I'd just therefore like to say a couple of words and make a few things clear. First of all 3 of these names that we've made public are heroes who died in combat. They were all killed in connection with Russian artillery strikes in various moments. The 2 Brazilians, Douglas and Talita, lost their lives during a fire that took place in a location that our fighters were using. And the fire also came about as a result of an artillery strike. Douglas tried to save Talita from the fire. Unfortunately, he perished himself, and Talita was able to leave the house that was on fire. Unfortunately, she had already inhaled too much exhaust and gases and died as a result of these gases. I want to make clear that all of them died with honor. We are eternally grateful for their ultimate sacrifice, and I think I can talk not only on behalf of the International Legion, but also on behalf of the entire Ukrainian people, that our thoughts and prayers go out to their families. And we are, of course, eternally grateful and will cherish their memory. We are currently in the process of repatriating the remains of these 3 legionnaires. I'd like to ask the press, and we've made a statement about this last week as well, I'd like to ask the press to respect the private lives of the families of the fallen. We've had a number of problems in this regard with the previous names that we made public, and already now with the names of Douglas and Talita. Their families have been at times harassed by members of the press in their home countries. I do understand that these members of the press are not represented today, but nevertheless, collegially, I would ask the entire press corps to treat the family's private life with respect. If they would like to get in touch with the families or ask them questions, they can do so through the International Legion's press office. They can get in touch with me, or they can get in touch with Mockingjay, who's our communications director, and we can pass on questions in case the families would like to answer them. But we'd like to ask everyone not to try to get in touch directly with their families. That's quite important. We've had some really negative experiences with this in the past few weeks. So we'd be very thankful if the press could respect that. I'll move on to the more a different topic that we need to talk about once again, and it's the topic of legionnaires that are in captivity, that are prisoners of war. And there is one such name that we've made public before. I'll repeat it. His name is Andrew Hill. He is a legionnaire that was captured on the southern front near Mykolaiv at the beginning of May, so it's starting to be 2.5 months now. Since the Russian side released videos with him, latest in the end of May, we have not had any news regarding Andrew Hill, his whereabouts or his welfare, except that last week, and this is what I'd like to comment on right now, there was an announcement that was made last week by the so-called prosecutor's office of the so-called DNR that Andrew Hill, as well as another British individual called Dylan Healy, would be put on trial, I think it's safe to say on sham trial, in the so-called courts of the so-called Republic. I think everyone understands that the prospects for them to get a fair trial with an impartial court are non-existent. I'd like to repeat that Andrew Hill is a prisoner of war. He's a lawful combatant under Article 4 of the Third Geneva Convention. He has a contract with the Ukrainian Armed Forces and is protected by the Geneva Conventions. Therefore, to prosecute him criminally for his participation in the hostilities is a grave violation of the Geneva Conventions. He enjoys immunity as a lawful combatant for his actions as part of the hostilities, and we would call for his immediate release or exchange within a prisoner exchange. I'll say a couple of words as well about Dylan Healy, who is not a legionnaire. In fact, from the information that I have, he is not a military personnel at all. He's indeed, as I've been told, a civilian volunteer that was helping with evacuations of civilians in the Zaporozhye region. And this person, Dylan Healy, has absolutely no link to the hostilities, and he should be released as a civilian. In both of these cases, we notice, of course, that the Russian side and their proxies are continuing their unlawful criminal persecutions of internationals who are in Ukraine for whatever reason. And this is true for our legionnaires, and as we see, it's true also for other types of volunteers who come to Ukraine to help either in a civilian capacity or in other capacities. It is the same case as was for these two British and one Moroccan nationals who were put through a sham trial a few weeks back that are all serving members of the armed forces in other parts of the armed forces, not legionnaires, but is the same case for them. What we see is that Russia is instrumentalizing any Western captives that they can get their hands off in order, as we think, to increase their bargaining position in negotiations when it comes to prisoner exchanges. We still very much hope that the death sentences that were handed down to the three nationals 2 weeks ago in the so-called DNR will not be carried through. Our hope is that the sham trials and the death sentences that were handed down are a way for the Russian sides to increase the bargaining value of these prisoners in the ongoing negotiations for prisoner exchanges. Unfortunately, there has been communications from the so-called DNRs, officials of the so-called DNR, to the effect that they were intending to carry out the sentences. I very much hope that's not the case, and what we're seeing is just posturing in the context of ongoing negotiations. In fact, it's following a pattern of Russia using all these, as I was trying to say before, using any Western captives they get their hands on for the purposes of disinformation, propaganda, as well as increasing their bargaining positions in negotiations. I'll say a couple of words as well about the 2 American prisoners of war who are currently held by Russia, who were, by the way, captured near Kharkov, but whom we understand the Russian side is planning once again to put on sham trials in the so-called DNR, which does raise some geographical questions. So, for example, how do captives who've been taken prisoner in a region of Ukraine that is only bordering to the territory of Russia itself end up geographically on the territory of the so-called DNR? There are theories going around that this is done because the so-called DNR still has capital punishment, whereas there's a moratorium on the capital punishment in Russia since 1997. I think that sounds like a plausible explanation, but in any case, it is a great worry for us to see that example after example comes up of these types of instrumentalization of captives who really are being caught in the crossfires in this entire situation. So I'll just finish on this topic by repeating my usual calls on the Russian authorities and their proxies to treat all of these captives as prisoners of war, as they're entitled to under the Geneva Convention, as well as giving access to them to the International Committee of the Red Cross, as they're under an obligation to do under Article 126 of the Third Geneva Convention. This is starting to become a regular call at all of these events. Unfortunately, I'm afraid I'm going to have to repeat that every time, since we see that the Russian side is not taking its obligations under the Geneva Convention seriously. Obviously, that's not a surprise for me, but nevertheless, this is the body of rules that we are that govern armed conflict, and at least the Ukrainian side is trying to uphold them. So I would call on the Russian authorities to follow their obligations there. There is one more topic I'd like to bring up, which is continued attempts at from the Russian propaganda machine to put wrongful information across in the international media with varying success. So that the latest was that we last week heard that Russia had, and if I remember the headline correctly, destroyed 200 more foreign fighters in an airstrike. That was also untrue. We've had examples in the past, for example, in connection with the bombing that happened at the Yavrev International Center for Peacekeeping and Security on 13th of March, whereafter the Russian Ministry of Defense also alleged that they had killed over 200 foreign fighters. That was later completely debunked and proved to be untrue, and we have here one more such example. I would like to encourage members of the press, before reporting with such information, even when the sources are official Russian authorities, I would very much encourage members of the press to get in touch with our press office to verify such information, at which point we will be happy to deny, as in this case, if the information is untrue. I think it's a recurrent theme that some members of the foreign press, and especially the Western press, unfortunately fall victim to these types of disinformation coming from the Russian General Staff or from the Russian Ministry of Defense, and uncritically publish information which is entirely untrue. So I would very much like to ask members of the Foreign Press Corps to try and work with us on filtering the information coming from official Russian sources, because some of it quite often, unfortunately, is untrue, and this was the case for this announcement last week. I've got a couple more points, and then I'll open for questions from the room. We are. I try to repeat this every time. We are entering a phase of the war where our disadvantage to the Russian forces in terms of heavy weaponry and artillery is still very much being felt. I am glad to report that I have seen firsthand, I have seen firsthand the reports of the work of the latest HIMARS systems that have been working for a couple of weeks in the areas of operations. I won't say where. This is very helpful, and we can see the results already. But as every time, I will repeat once again, although Ukraine and the Ukrainian armed forces, and I can say this on behalf of the International Legion, are very grateful for the military aid that's been given by NATO countries since the beginning of the war, and it's been decisive in managing to stem the tide of the Russian invasion, without which the war would have gone much worse. And of course, we're very thankful for the help that's already been given, but it cannot be considered by any means to be enough. We are still outnumbered roughly 8-1 in terms of heavy artillery. I could cite the other statistics, but I think you're familiar with them. In other terms, we are still vastly outgunned, and we will need a lot more heavy weaponry in order to turn the tide. So please keep it coming, and this is a message to both decision makers in NATO countries, but also to normal civilian populations. If you see this, you all have the power to help. You can write to your MP, you can ring your congressman, you can put pressure on them, you can do petitions, put pressure on your governments so that military aid keeps coming to Ukraine. It's of vital importance for the continuation of the war, and without this weaponry, we will not be able to win. One last thing is, often I try on these briefings to focus on things that have to do with the Legion itself, but I'd like to bring up a matter which has been covered quite well, but which I haven't mentioned earlier. And it's the case that we are witnessing every day, also on our positions, and also our legionnaires are witnessing war crimes being committed by the Russian forces. And those take the shape of both artillery strikes and air strikes and missile strikes on civilian objects and civilian infrastructure. We are ourselves witness to these facts. Legionnaires have offered, and I'll pass on the offer when I have a meeting with them, to the investigative working group that's been set up by the President of Ukraine to document instances of war crime in this war. We've offered to adduce evidence in this regard, but I would like to repeat this, that what we are witnessing is a complete disregard for the body of rules that regulate armed conflict in the Geneva Convention and other instruments of international humanitarian law. Unfortunately, that is continuing, and it needs to stop. I think this was all from me. I'd like to open the floor if there are any questions.
Дам'єне, скажіть, будь ласка, чи долучаються
Do international organizations participate in the liberation of international citizens, combatants, and civilian volunteers?
I can't comment on ongoing negotiations as to prisoner exchanges. We heard the President of Ukraine during an interview, if I'm not mistaken, at the beginning of last week, saying that everything is being done to free the 2 Americans that are in captivity at the moment. So I'll take the President's word for it. I know, or at the least, I very strongly suspect that there are active negotiations going on with the Russian side with a view of having these prisoners of war exchanged. I've heard various claims from various pro-Russian sources that these prisoners would be offered for an exchange. against high-profile prisoners that are held by the Ukrainian side, such as certain pro-Russian politicians whose name I won't mention. I think this illustrates what I was saying, that these prisoners of war are being used as bargaining chips, and that the Russian side is trying to get as much value out of them as possible. I can't comment on the involvement of international organizations simply because I have no first-hand knowledge. I'm not involved in these negotiations, but since it is the official role of the International Committee of the Red Cross to facilitate and mediate such negotiations, then I have no doubt, or at least I very much hope, that they're involved indeed.
Шановні колеги, ваше питання, прошу у мікрофон.
Taiwanese people who on the front line and how the situation right now. And the information I have is that no one from the mainland China had joined. Is that they kind of got permission, or they have any other reason?
Unfortunately, we can't talk about numbers. We're not allowed to disclose numbers, but I can confirm we have Taiwanese volunteers. I can confirm also that we have had Chinese volunteers. I'm not sure if they're still in the Legion. I'd have to check. So we've had both Taiwanese and mainland Chinese legionnaires in the Legion. I can't talk about numbers, but I can say something about the conditions on the front, since you raised that matter. The conditions on the front, I think it won't be a surprise for anyone, are extremely difficult at the moment. The war has gone into a very, let's say, a very brutal war of attrition with extremely frequent artillery strikes and a very static front. And all together, that makes for extremely difficult fighting conditions for our legionnaires and for all the other Ukrainian defenders. My hope, we've heard a couple of days ago that the president of Ukraine has ordered the liberation of southern Ukraine. We are all expecting some movement on the southern front. My hope is that the front line will become more fluid, that the type of fighting that we're seeing will evolve, and that we move away from this artillery war, which I think is really taking a strain on I think soldiers on both sides, to be honest. So hopefully that will change in the near future.
Ще питання.
Ukrinform, Natalia Molchanova. You have mentioned the fake of the Russian propaganda. What are the other fakes and manipulations of the Russian propaganda that you have faced, and does it have any impact on the morale of those in the Legion?
The reason is quite obvious. They want to make the international community believe that we are weaker than we are. They want to make themselves seem stronger than they are. They want to affect negatively morale in the Ukrainian army. I think the reasons are pretty obvious. Whether it has had an effect, unfortunately, I think it has. One of the reasons is that we spent the first 2 months of this war as the International Legion fighting disinformation and fake reports and wrong information that was being disseminated about the Legion, whether it was by Russian agents or Russian forces, or whether it was by, let's say, former legionnaires or people who were even impersonating legionnaires, running their mouth completely creatively. In both cases, whether it's malign action by the Russian side or whether it's individual actors, disinformation hurts us for our recruitment, it hurts us for our reputation, it hurts us for our fundraising efforts. And so, unfortunately, yes, it has had an effect. My hope is that with time, and we've managed to formalize the relationships with the press. We've had several press events here. We've had more and more speakers that have been approved to talk to the press, and we're showing more and more faces of our legionnaires. I think with time, hopefully, some of that disinformation is going to be corrected, and I can say with a little bit of optimism that the situation today is a lot better than what it was 3 months ago in terms of disinformation. But of course it has an effect, and that's why it has to be virulently opposed.
Ще питання?
Ludovic de Foucault, France 24. I understand you cannot give numbers, but what can you say maybe of the nationalities that would be the more represented in the Légion? And also, what can you say about the French national that you mentioned at the beginning of your statement?
I've answered this question many times, so I'll just say it quickly. We've got over 50 nationalities represented from every continent, and the most represented are Americans and Brits. I'll just hop over this because I've answered this question many times before. I will say a couple words about Adrien Loyodek. He was one of our very first legionnaires. He joined on the 1st of March, so in the very beginning of the war. I, in fact, knew him from the very beginning of the war. We met personally. He's been an incredibly effective and respected member of the International Legion. The feedback from his commander was exclusively positive. He had made very, very strong friends who have been supporting both my team and the family in the repatriation process. His remains are currently en route to France, where hopefully they will arrive in the coming days. It's been like every single such case. It's always difficult. I want to say a particular thank you to his mother Maud, with whom I've talked several times, for her support for the Legion and for the very good communication we've had since his death. He died a hero in action, and his sacrifice will never be forgotten by the Legion.
Ще питання? Я дякую вам.
Thank you so much. This was Damien Magrou, the speaker of the International Legion of Ukraine. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you, dear colleagues, for being with us. Please follow our announcements and stay with us. Glory to Ukraine.
Чудова українська.